Formula One is one of those sports where you could spend your entire life learning about every single person involved and still die knowing maybe 40% of it. You've got your engineers, your strategists, your guy whose only job is apparently to hold an umbrella over a driver for 30 seconds, your billionaire team owners, and the occasional random celebrity in the paddock who nobody invited. But the people everyone actually shows up for, the ones with the helmets, the sponsors plastered across their chests, and the absolutely questionable life decisions are the drivers. And in 2026, there are 22 of them, spread across 11 teams, which, by the way, now includes Cadillac. Some of these guys have world championships. Some of them have been this close to world championships, and it haunts them every single morning. Some of them are teenagers who statistically should be worrying about exams right now. And at least one of them, and I won't name names, is racing for a team that is literally owned by his father. So in this video, we're going through all of them, every single driver on the 2026 F1 grid. And we kick things off with yours truly, Lando Norris, your 2025 world champion. And honestly, the fact that we're saying that is a miracle, because the road to that title was so unhinged it could have its own Netflix series separate from Drive to Survive. But strip away the titles, who is Lando? He's a British kid from Bristol who joined McLaren in 2019 at 19 years old and has basically been there ever since. Funny, fast, chaotic. The type of guy who will scream on the team radio and then laugh about it in the post-race interview. For a long time, he was just everyone's favorite driver. Like, genuinely hard to find someone who didn't like Lando in those early years. And then 2024 happened, and Lando decided to open his mouth. The trash talk era of Lando Norris. Probably one of the most fascinating disasters in recent F1 history, because the confidence was absolutely there, the results just weren't. Pole position after pole position, and somehow losing 6 places by lap 2. And in the middle of all this, he called Max's championship luck.
It's not talent or, it's just luck.
Which, okay, was bold, especially when Max was sat there with 4 titles and Lando was out there losing positions to himself. And when the trash talk backfired, Lando went full opposite direction and started beating himself up on the radio, calling himself an idiot, and sounded like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole in every interview. So you had this guy swinging between WWE levels of confidence and actual depression in the space of like 3 races. His PR team deserved a raise. But here's the thing, strip all that away and Lando was genuinely one of the fastest drivers on the grid. 2025, something clicked. He found whatever was in the middle of cocky and broken and rode it to a world championship. And look, he's funny, he's quick, he must watch television whether he's winning or crashing or liking hate comments on Instagram. World champion now though, so you can't say anything, that's the rules. Piastri is one of those drivers who does everything right and looks like he couldn't care less about it. The man won F3 in his debut season, jumped straight to F2 and won that on debut too. Speedran his entire junior career like he had somewhere better to be. Then he gets to F1 with McLaren in 2023 and finishes his rookie year with 97 points, a sprint podium, and a race win in Qatar. The race where drivers were literally throwing up in their cockpits, by the way. And he did all of this with the most nonchalant facial expression. That face is genuinely one of the most fascinating things about Oscar. Whether he wins a race, gets taken out lap 1, or watches an empire crumble in front of him, you're gonna get the same look. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that whatever is happening externally just doesn't seem to reach him. Which sounds boring until you realize that quality alone puts him ahead of half the grid mentally. Oscar also happens to be the end result of taking all the best traits from the best drivers and just combining them into one person. Races clean, overtakes aggressively, learns faster than anyone. There's this thing he does where every time something goes wrong or someone beats him a certain way, he just flies it away and never lets it happen again. Got caught out fighting Hamilton out of the pits on cold tires once, never again. Got passed by Max in Spa a certain way, went out and used the exact same move on Lando in the actual race, and won. The guy literally beat Max Verstappen in Miami by faking an overtake on the outside just to force him into braking late and locking up, then came back underneath. That's not instinct, that's chess. The only weakness anyone can really pin on him is that he's such a good all-rounder that he doesn't have one freakish exceptional area. But honestly, if that's the worst thing you can say about a driver in their 4th year of F1, then mate, he's going to be absolutely fine. Charles Leclerc is Ferrari's golden boy and has been since basically the moment he arrived. Born and raised in Monaco, speaks French, Italian, and English fluently, surfs, skis, has a fancy gaming setup at home, loves dogs, genuinely just a lovely bloke. And Ferrari has been torturing him for years. That's the thing about Charles. You could write his entire story as a tragedy and it would be completely accurate. The talent has never been the issue. This is a driver who can challenge Max, Lewis, and Alonso on any given weekend. 2022, he was genuinely on course for a world championship, and Ferrari just didn't let him have it. Strategy call after strategy call, pit stop after pit stop, the team found new and creative ways to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, while Charles sat in the cockpit quietly going insane. And the mad thing is, Charles has stayed through all of it. While drivers like Vettel came to Ferrari, got broken, and left looking 10 years older, Charles just keeps showing up. Because that's the thing about being a Ferrari driver. If you actually manage to win a championship with that team, it hits different to winning anywhere else. Charles knows that, which is either incredibly admirable or a sign that he needs help. Possibly both. Off track, he's genuinely one of the more likable people in the paddock. Goofy, self-aware, plays the piano, does his little Monaco home race every year where the whole city basically shuts down for him. And his Monaco record is actually brilliant, which is almost cruel given everything else Ferrari puts him through. Ferrari fans and Charles Leclerc fans are the same person, and that person has been through things. But here's the honest truth. Charles is good enough. Like properly, undeniably good enough. One day Charles Leclerc is going to win a world championship and it's going to feel absolutely enormous. Could be this year, could be in 30 years. Ferrari will decide, not Charles. Sir Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, the most successful driver in Formula One history, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, and currently sat in a Ferrari going absolutely nowhere. Let's rewind though, because the Lewis Hamilton story is genuinely one of the greatest in the sport. This man showed up to Formula One in 2007 as a 19-year-old rookie paired with the reigning world champion Fernando Alonso at McLaren, and nearly won the championship on his debut. Nearly. Lost it to Kimi Räikkönen by a single point on the last lap of the race of this season. If that happened to most people, they'd need years of therapy. Lewis came back the next year and won it. That's just who he is. And then came the Mercedes era, where Lewis basically turned Formula One into a one-man show for the better part of the decade. 6 of his 7 championships came there. Records that people thought were untouchable, he just quietly broke one by one. Most wins, most pole positions. The numbers are honestly stupid. He's also the first and only black driver in Formula One history, which carries a weight, and he's never let anyone forget that. Off track, this man is something else. He secretly recorded music under the alias XNDA and appeared on a Christina Aguilera track for years before anyone knew it was him. He turned down a role in Top Gun Maverick because of F1 clashes and called it the most upsetting phone call he ever had to make. He co-produced the Brad Pitt F1 film. He's a part owner of the Denver Broncos. He has a famous vegan bulldog called Roscoe who has more Instagram followers than most people will ever dream of. He lives in the villa that Enzo Ferrari and Michael Schumacher used to live in. The man is built different, which makes the Ferrari chapter so painful to watch, because Ferrari has this incredible talent for taking world-class drivers and slowly dismantling them from the inside. Vettel left broken, Alonso left furious, and Lewis went through all 5 stages of Ferrari grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance in about half a season. 7-time world champion reduced to saying,
I'm just useless.
So say again?
I'm just useless.
I'm just useless. On team radio, Ferrari really said, hold my espresso. 4-time world champion, the man who looks exactly like Sid from Ice Age and drives like he has absolutely nothing to lose. Let's start at the beginning because the backstory matters. Max was basically born into racing whether he liked it or not. His dad Jos Verstappen was a racing driver who decided his son was going to be the best driver who ever lived, and went about making that happen in the most unhinged way possible, racing in freezing conditions. Fingers too cold to move. Jos didn't care. Max once said his dad left him at a petrol station as a teenager during an argument, and people wonder why this man has the mentality of someone who has genuinely nothing left to fear. He got shoved into an F1 car at 17 years old, joined Red Bull in 2016, and won his debut race with them before he even had his driving license. What makes Max genuinely terrifying to watch is the overdriving, when the car isn't good enough. Max just refuses to accept that and extracts pace from places that shouldn't exist. Red Bull actually admitted that he drove the RB16 so fast in 2020 that the entire team ignored the car's fundamental flaws for almost a full season, because Max kept winning anyway. He was so good he made his own team slower. You genuinely cannot make that up. Brazil 2024 is probably the clearest example of what Max actually is. Starting 17th in one of the most chaotic wet races in recent memory, while everyone else was kissing walls and spinning into the void, Max was just quietly climbing through the field, pumping out the fastest lap after fastest lap. won the race, crushed Lando's championship hopes, secured his 4th title. And here's one thing about Max. He does not care what you think. Gets booed at a race, says as long as he takes the trophy home, they can have a nice evening. This man operates on a completely different frequency to everyone else. Off track, he sim races constantly, wears his Red Bull shirt everywhere, including his child's gender reveal, and streams Minecraft in the middle of a championship fight. 4 world championships, destroyed every teammate he's ever had. Done it with cars that weren't always the best, and still, somehow the most unfiltered, unbothered person in the paddock. Sid from Ice Age, if Sid from Ice Age was genuinely the greatest racing driver of his generation. Fernando Alonso, 2-time world champion, one of the greatest drivers to ever do it, and also somehow the youngest driver on the grid. Now, before you say anything, just think about it for a second. This man does grillets on TikTok. He gives fire forehead shots on camera. He's been in Formula 1 since 2001, and yet somehow, Fernando Alonso is a rookie. The actual career though, he joined Renault in 2003, pulled off stunning overtakes on Michael Schumacher, and won back-to-back championships in 2005 and 2006 against Schumacher, the greatest of his era, before he was 25. At that point, everyone assumed this man was going to collect titles like parking tickets for the next decade. Then 2007 happened, and Fernando's luck essentially filed for bankruptcy. Joined McLaren with a rocket ship of a car, got Lewis Hamilton as a rookie teammate who refused to behave like a rookie, got dragged into Spygate when McLaren lost the Constructors' Championship for having Ferrari's secret documents, and ended the season tied on points with that same rookie losing the title by a single point. Then Ferrari from 2010 to 2014 was 4 years of Fernando dragging genuinely terrible machinery to places it had absolutely no right being. Then McLaren Honda, 4 years of Fernando essentially becoming a tractor driver as described. The radio messages from this era are some of the funniest and most painful things ever put on television.
How's the balance? I don't know. No more radio for the rest of the race.
The car was so bad McLaren barely had sponsors, so Fernando sponsored them himself with his own clothing brand. Then Alpine, then Aston Martin. Brief, beautiful 2023 where he got 8 podiums. Then Aston Martin's upgrade stopped working and the car just got slower with every update like they were deliberately trying to make it worse. 23 years. Enough bad luck to fill several lifetimes. And yet, he is in 2026. That chill uncle energy fully intact. There is something almost unfair about how good Hadjar was in 2025. Because while every other rookie on the grid had at least one moment where you covered your eyes, one incident that made you question whether they were ready, one weekend where the wheels completely fell off, Hadjar just didn't really do that. He crashed out in Australia but didn't take anyone with him. Tagged Antonelli in Silverstone in genuinely horrible conditions, which any driver on the grid could have done. That was basically it. That was the floor of his season. For a rookie, that's basically unheard of. He dominated Liam Lawson as a teammate despite Lawson having significantly more Formula 1 experience, outscored him, outraced him in their head-to-heads, out-qualified him on average by nearly 2/10, and Lawson is not a bad driver. Hadjar just made him look like one. The peak of the season was Zandvoort, a podium in his first year, shadowing Max Verstappen all the way to 3rd place after Lando's retirement. The funniest part of the whole story is that Red Bull never really wanted him in Formula 1 in the first place. He basically got the Racing Bull seat because the driver shuffle after Perez left created a vacancy that needed filling. They put him there out of necessity. Now he's at Red Bull alongside Verstappen in 2026, which is either the best opportunity in motorsport or the most terrifying, depending on how you look at it. Either way, it's going to be must-watch television. New Zealand's finest. And 2025 was a year that probably aged him about 10 years. It started at Red Bull, alongside Max Verstappen, which in theory sounds like an opportunity, and in practice was something closer to being dropped into the deep end of the ocean with a blindfold on and one arm tied behind your back. Nobody beats Max at Red Bull. That's just the established law of the universe at this point. But the gap was so significant so quickly that Red Bull made the call after just a handful of races and shuffled him back to Racing Bulls, which is already a brutal thing to happen to anyone, but especially to a driver who had waited so long for his proper chance. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because even at Racing Bulls, away from the Verstappen chaos, alongside Hadjar who never started a Grand Prix in his life, Lawson still got beaten. To be fair to Lawson, there were genuine highlights. 5th in Baku ahead of Tsunoda in the Red Bull was a proper result, 6th in Austria, 7th in Sao Paulo. When it clicked, it properly clicked. The pace was always there somewhere. The consistency just wasn't. The frustrating thing about Lawson is that he is clearly a decent driver. The raw material is real, but 2025 was supposed to be his year to prove he belonged at the top level, and instead, it raised more questions than it answered. 2026 is at Racing Bulls again alongside rookie Arvid Lindblad, which means this time there are no excuses. He is the experienced one now. Time to show it. Bearman had already done his little preview. Stepped into the Ferrari mid-season 2024 when Sainz got appendicitis, scored points on debut, went home, came back for Haas, scored more points, went home again, like a contractor who keeps getting called back because the work is just that good. By the time 2025 actually started, Bearman had already lived 3 rookie experiences that most drivers never get once. And 2025 was a proper Jekyll and Hyde season. The highs were genuinely exciting. 5-point finishes in a row to end the year, including 4th in Mexico, which could have realistically been a podium. Held off Max Verstappen in the opening stint, which is the kind of thing that gets you on a highlight reel for the rest of your career. Out-qualified Esteban Ocon and beat him in the championship, which when you consider Ocon has been in Formula 1 for years is not a small thing to do. He was also on the verge of an actual race ban at one point. Crashed under a red flag in Silverstone practice. Some of the incidents he got involved in were completely unnecessary and the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who just passed their driving test, not someone with his ability. But that's Bearman in 2025. 2025 was honestly a mixed bag, but in the most understandable way possible. The car was genuinely terrible at the start of the season. Like not just midfield bad, properly difficult to score points in bad. And Bortoleto was in there trying to extract miracles next to Nico Hulkenberg, who has been doing exactly that his entire career, so the comparison was always going to be tough. But what was impressive was that by the end of the season, as the car improved, Bortoleto actually outqualified Hulkenberg more often than not. Went on a 4 points finishes in 6 races run, had a beautiful 6th place in Hungary that showed exactly what this kid can do when the machinery lets him breathe. Then Sao Paulo happened, where he crashed out multiple times at his home Grand Prix in front of his entire country watching. And then Las Vegas Lap 1 Turn 1 was the kind of incident that makes you want to put the TV on mute and just stare at the wall for a bit. But honestly, for a kid in a difficult car against one of the most experienced point scorers on the grid, year 1 was fine. Year 2 is where it gets interesting. 18 years old, Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton's seat. No pressure whatsoever. Because that's genuinely what happened. Toto Wolff looked at the entire driver market, looked at every available option, looked at this 18-year-old Italian kid who had never started a Formula 1 race, and picked him. And honestly, the season reflected exactly what you'd expect from an 18-year-old thrown into the deep end of the deepest pool in motorsport. The highs were filthy. 2nd place in Sao Paulo, controlling Verstappen behind him in the closing laps without making a single error. Podium in Las Vegas, coming from 17th on the grid. Moments that made you go, oh, this kid is the real thing. Then there were the moments that reminded you he's 18. Taking Max out in Austria, getting tangled up with Leclerc and Zandvoort, ending the season nearly half a second slower than George Russell in qualifying on average, which is a bigger gap than anyone was expecting. But step back for a second. He's 18. He spent his entire rookie season in a race-winning car fighting at the sharp end of the grid, stood on the podium multiple times, and gave Toto Wolff 0 reasons to regret the decision. The ceiling on this kid is genuinely ridiculous. 2026 is where we'll find out if 2025 was just the warm-up. The Argentine, who basically gate-crashed Formula 1 twice and somehow kept getting invited back. Williams was struggling with Logan Sargent, who was having one of those seasons where everything that could go wrong did. And halfway through 2024, they just went, you know what? And called up this Argentine kid who had never driven an F1 car in a race weekend. Threw him in at Monza with 9 races to go and basically said good luck. And Colapinto went to Azerbaijan and scored points. First Argentine to score points in Formula 1 since Carlos Reutemann in 1982. That is not a small stat. That is over 40 years of nothing, and then this guy shows up and immediately puts it on the board. Argentina was understandably going absolutely feral. Then the crashes started. Brazil qualifying, he binned it. Las Vegas, he hit the barrier so hard at 50G that he had to start from the pit lane. Qatar, he retired on lap 1. The back end of 2024 was genuinely chaotic, and Williams ran out of spare parts for his car, which is a specific kind of embarrassing. But the pace and the promise were obvious enough that Alpine saw it and essentially paid millions to pry him away from his Williams commitment for 2025. Then, Alpine being Alpine, the 2025 season was a mess. Car was terrible, no points, got dropped in after Duhan was moved aside, had 5 races initially, kept the seat on basically a week-by-week basis like someone on a 0 hours contract. His best finish all season was 11th in the Dutch Grand Prix, but here he is in 2025 2026 with a full season alongside Gasly finally getting a proper run. The talent is there. Now he just needs a car that isn't actively working against him. Carlos Sainz, when he switched on, is genuinely one of the cleanest, most complete drivers on the grid. Toro Rosso, Renault, McLaren, Ferrari. Every single team he's joined has improved in his first season. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And Williams 2025 was no different. Now, the Sainz to Williams move was basically the motorsport equivalent of getting dumped by your long-term partner. Ferrari dropped him for Lewis Hamilton, thank you very much, and having to move into a smaller flat. But here's the thing, Williams quietly had their best season since 2017, 5th in the Constructors. 2 podiums. The start was rough though. Albon was lapping him in points for most of the first half, 3 P5 finishes from Albon, while Sainz was still figuring out what the Williams wanted from him. Then Baku happened, P3, then Qatar, P3 again. 48 points in the final 8 races while Albon scored 3. Just completely reversed their fortunes in a few months. Nico Hulkenberg is what happens when you take a genuinely talented driver and spend 15 years putting him in cars that weren't quite good enough. The Hulk has been dragging midfield boxes into the top 5 in qualifying since 2010. He won Le Mans on his first attempt in 2015. He held the record for the most race starts without a podium for so long people basically gave up hoping. 239 attempts. 239 times someone else got the trophy. Until last year when he got his first podium, 239 races deep. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the same number of times Ferrari have made a strategy error. What made 2025 special was that he wasn't just there as a seat filler, he was signed by Sauber specifically to be the experienced hand steering the team through their transition into Audi. And he delivered. He's also genuinely one of the most understated personalities in F1. Now he's leading the charge as the actual Audi Works team in 2026. Finally got his hands on something properly funded. If that first podium was anything to go by, he's not done yet. Valtteri Bottas spent 5 years at Mercedes being the second best person in the building. He has more second place finishes in a single season without a win than anyone in Formula 1 history. 7 runner-up finishes in 2018 alone. That's a very particular kind of suffering that only Lewis Hamilton could have inflicted on a man. After Mercedes, 3 years at Sauber where the car essentially stopped working entirely. By 2024, they scored 1 point all season. Bottas scored none of them. Then Sauber didn't renew. Then he spent 2025 as a Mercedes reserve driver, back in Brackley, back with the team that had replaced him with George Russell, watching from the pit wall. But then, Cadillac came knocking, building everything from scratch in 3 different countries simultaneously, and Bottas said yes. Lance Stroll is literally Joe Biden. I know, just stay with me. Both have fallen downstairs, both have fallen off their bicycles, and both act like nothing happened. The thing with Stroll is he can genuinely drive. 2025 was his 9th year in F1 and probably his toughest, 16th in the championship. Alonso outqualified him at literally every single race. Every single one. He missed Spain entirely due to a wrist injury. When he did finish in the points, it was usually because the race was chaotic enough that everyone else around him also had a disaster. Stroll has been in F1 since 2017. His dad owns every team he's been in. That's just the deal. Some people will spend their whole careers being outscored by their teammate by 23 points and still come back next year in the same seat. That is what job security looks like. Pierre Gasly is an extremely talented Frenchman who is friends with basically everyone in the paddock, rises up with the ladies, but we all know at the end of the day is gay for Yuki Tsunoda. What I will say is that in 2025, Gasly was the one thing keeping Alpine from completely disappearing into the background. The team finished last in the Constructors, bottom, for the first time in their history as Alpine. The car was so slow they stopped developing it halfway through the season to focus entirely on 2026. And Gasly just kept showing up. Every single point Alpine scored, all 22 of them came from him. Not 1 point from either of his 2 teammates. The highlight was Silverstone in the wet where he dragged the underperforming car to 6th, which was overshadowed by Hulkenberg getting his first podium in the same race. But still, 6th in those conditions in that car was genuinely impressive. Alex Albon has a backstory that would make someone else a villain. Red Bull picked him up from Toro Rosso in 2019 and threw him straight into a seat next to Max Verstappen after one good half season, which is approximately the worst possible thing you can do to someone's career trajectory. Got ruined by Lewis Hamilton on track a couple of times, got dropped at the end of 2020 because he wasn't Max. Spent a year on the sidelines, came back with Williams in 2022 when they were genuinely the worst team on the grid, and has been making the best of a difficult situation ever since. But 2025 was different. Williams had actually built a proper car, Carlos Sainz had arrived as a proper benchmark, and Albon just responded. 3 P5 finishes in the first chunk of the season. Australia, Miami, Imola, consistently in the points. Consistently faster than or matching Sainz in the early part of the year. 8th in the championship at the end, best season of his career. 73 points for someone driving a Williams is genuinely remarkable. George Russell drives into people and somehow convinces himself they were at fault. But here's the thing about George that doesn't get said enough. In 2025, with Lewis Hamilton gone to Ferrari, he was the guy holding Mercedes together. New teammate in 18-year-old Antonelli, car that wasn't quite matching McLaren. Contract year on top of all that, and he still won Canada. Won Singapore, 9 podiums across the season, finished 4th in the championship. In a year when McLaren won both titles and Max was the only other person to beat them, Russell was making it happen in the W16 when the W16 absolutely did not feel like cooperating. Going into 2026, he's the de facto team leader at Mercedes, with a new technical era, a new power unit, and a rookie teammate who's been tipped as the next big thing. If Mercedes have got their car right, George Russell is the man who's going to do something with it. Sergio Perez was absolutely brilliant until he went to Red Bull. Brutal, but also sort of true in a roundabout way, because Checo got to Red Bull, helped Max win his first title in 2021, helped them win back-to-back Constructors' Championships in 2022 and 2023, was runner-up to Max in the driver's standings in 2023, and then 2024 happened, and it all just fell apart. 9 points across the last 8 races of the season, 285 points behind his own teammate by the end. Red Bull terminated the contract they had just extended 6 months earlier. He spent 2025 away from the grid entirely, did interviews where he said he knows deep down Red Bull regrets the decision from a very reliable source, and then Cadillac offered him a seat alongside Bottas as the headliners for the very first American F1 team in decades. Esteban Ocon came from a family that sold their house and lived in a caravan traveling between circuits just to fund his karting career. His dad is a mechanic who owns a garage in Normandy. He has had to work for every single thing he's got in this sport, which makes him almost the polar opposite of his current teammate's main billing at Aston Martin. But we'll get to that one later. The thing with Ocon is he can absolutely drive. 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix, he won that, beat Hamilton and Vettel in a chaos-fueled race, and was absolutely losing his mind on the radio when it happened. The problem is, for years, Ocon has also had a habit of beefing with his teammates. Gasly from their karting days, Max, Perez tried to kill him twice apparently, terrorized Alonso while they were at Alpine together. He has personal beef with God knows how many people in this paddock. Then he moved to Haas for 2025 and said it was the healthiest team environment he'd ever been in. Best relationship with a teammate he's ever had, and his teammate was 18-year-old Oliver Bearman, who then proceeded to outscore him by 3 points and outqualify him 14-10 by the end of the year. Now going into 2026, Bearman is coming for his seat properly. Jack Doohan is lurking as reserve, and the new regulations are a reset. Ocon needs to show up. He has the talent, he always has, he just needs everything to click at the same time, which for Ocon has never been guaranteed. But he's still far from the worst F1 driver of all time, and if you want to find out who that title belongs to, click the video on your screen right now.